can't tell I was just in the keys. I don't want to keys anymore. Don't trust me with the keys. Okay. Should we come in? Good. Yeah, come on close. Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, hello. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Marita, and I'm the Special Collections Education and Engagement Librarian here. Thanks for joining us for our October page turning event. This is an event. Can I see a raising hands? How many first timers there are? Yay. Welcome, and welcome back to those of you who have been joining us since, maybe you've been joining us since 2016, which is when we started this event, which is pretty wild to think about. We are delighted to have our guest speaker here, who I will introduce in just a moment. But I do want to let you know that we're all here, but I want you to come back next month when a poet and the archivist for the main Women's Writers Collection, Jefferson Novicki, will be here. So that's November 7th. Who knows that? Those are first Fridays. And then the following month in December, which I think is the 2nd. Okay, Candace only knows. November, when we will have book artist and main master naturalist Jill Osgood joining us. Really excited for this lineup. We are streaming to YouTube, so if you're not able to join us the next 2 months, you can join us from your computer wherever. And we're excited to have our viewers joining us from around the country. Let's see. Any other housekeeping things? Do you have anything you want to say? No? Okay. This is Kat Stefko, our department director, who in this capacity is my trusty assistant to turn the page. Exactly right. It's your favorite time. Exactly. It's my favorite time of the month where the power really shifts. So she does have the keys for the case. I'm going to introduce our guest speaker. Kat and I will open up the case. We're going to turn the page with our bare hands as opposed to white gloves because our hands are clean, and I think it's a better sense of tactility, so we're less likely to put any tears or damages on the page. So Brandon Tate is joining us today, who will come to the fore in just a moment. Brandon is a visiting faculty member in the Chemistry Department and the Environmental Studies program at Bowdoin. He earned a PhD in chemistry from Georgia Tech in 2015 and taught in the State University of New York system and at Bates College before joining the faculty at Bowdoin. He served on the board of a National Audubon Society local chapter in New York State and is currently working with the main Audubon and a group of volunteers at Bowdoin to survey the Bowdoin campus for areas where windows may pose a danger for migrating birds. So I'm so thrilled that you're here to join us. So thank you. And we will open this up, flip the bird, and then turn things over. I think it is the right key. One of them is bent. One of them is bent, yeah. We're in good shape over here. So come in close to take a look, and Brandon, if you don't mind being in this area so we can capture you on, or just somewhere over here so we can capture you.
But if you go back here, we're in
Perfect, right where you are. Thank you.
I don't want to stand in front of the new page. So I thought I would start today by talking a little bit about this month's bird, the bay-breasted warbler. So like most members of the warbler family, which there are about 40-something members of in North America, the bay-breasted warbler is what's called a long-distance migrant, right? So as opposed to the short-distance migrants like goldfinches and towhees that may travel a few hundred miles during the change of seasons. The bay-breasted warbler and most other warblers will travel thousands of miles between their breeding grounds in the summer and their wintering grounds in the winter. So the bay-breasted warbler specifically breeds mostly in Canada, in the boreal forest. There are a few pockets in the U.S. where they are known to breed. That includes the higher elevations of Maine, right? So the White Mountains that span across New Hampshire and Maine, and the North Maine woods. But also found breeding in the Adirondacks in the state of New York, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and that's all. Those are the few places where I was thinking there was one more on my list here, but no, that's it. So then where do they go in the winter? Well, they go to a much more tropical environment. Most of them go to all the way to South America, right? So most of them go to Colombia and Venezuela. Some of them don't want to go quite so far, so they make a stopover in the Caribbean islands. So on average, they're traveling about 4,000 miles between winter and summer. And of course, 6 months later, they turn around and come back. They do pass through this area during migration, so it's usually not too difficult to find them during certain times of the year when they're passing through, especially being close to the coast as we are. Many of them will follow the coastline during their migration. So, like I said, pretty much all members of the warbler family are what's known as long-distance migrants. And so that brings me to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which was how do birds know where to go during migration? How do they know which direction to fly? So, of course, there's a lot of instinct involved, but even with instinct, birds still have to have some way to orient themselves, right, in their environment. So birds need to know the difference between north and south, right? So I guess the question I'm asking is, how do birds know which way is north and which way is south? And well, it's complicated, right? There are a lot of ways that they can do that, right? So they can tell directions the same way that we can, right? So they can look at landmarks, right? They can follow rivers and coastlines. They can also judge direction based on what we call celestial cues, right? Which is something that we also do, right? We can pay attention to where is the sun rising, where is the sun setting, and we can also look at the position of the moon and stars, right? So birds can do the same. They can rely on celestial cues to give them some sense of direction. But there is also evidence that birds have another ability, another sense, essentially, that allows them to distinguish north and south. It's called magnetoreception, right? So birds can sense the Earth's magnetic field and gauge their direction of flight based on that. So this ability of magnetoreception has been suspected especially by people who work closely with birds, right, for hundreds of years, right? So it was a theory, a hypothesis first put forth by people who train not passenger pigeons, but carrier pigeons, homing pigeons, to explain how the pigeons were able to find their way back home after being taken hundreds or thousands of miles away. More recently, this ability for birds to sense magnetic fields and judge direction based on that has been, I hesitate to say proven, but there is a substantial amount of evidence that has been published in the last few years that's fairly convincing that birds really do have this ability, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about how that works, right? We have any idea how it works. So Um, I guess now it's time for a chemistry lesson, right? So, I can't avoid talking about chemistry. Although I will say I'm not a biochemist, so this is not exactly, this is maybe a little bit outside my wheelhouse, but it's something I still find really super interesting. So hopefully I can do it justice in my explanation here, right? So birds are sensing a magnetic field of the Earth, right? They're sensing these magnetic forces. They must have some kind of chemical mechanism to do that, right? Because in order for any material to be affected by a magnetic field, it has to have some kind of magnetic properties itself, right? And so what this usually boils down to is the electrons, right? So electrons have negative charges and they have spins. Things that have electrical charges and spin generate magnetic fields. And so molecular biologists and biochemists have been looking for some biomolecule or some substance in migratory birds that may have electrons that are suitable for this, right? And so specifically, what you need in order to sense a magnetic field would be unpaired electrons, right? So most of the electrons that are in biomolecules, right? So most of the electrons in our bodies are all paired together, right? So electrons have positive spins or negative spins, and they tend to pair up, so their magnetic fields cancel each other out, right? So you and I can walk through a magnetic field without feeling anything, right? We're not pushed or pulled by magnetic forces. So in order to be affected by a magnetic field, you need some unpaired electrons somewhere where their individual magnetic fields aren't canceling out. So for a while, there was a hypothesis that birds were able to sense magnetic fields because they have some iron in their beaks. Right? They have a usually high or fairly high concentration of iron in their beaks. And iron is an element that typically has unpaired electrons. So for a while, people were sort of coming up with hypotheses and sort of hypothetical explanations for how that might lead to somehow an ability to sense a magnetic field. But over the years, there really hasn't been much hard evidence to support any of those theories, any of those hypotheses, right? So more recently, there's been, it's really over the last 5 or 10 years or so, there has been a collection of new experimental results that have been published that provides pretty convincing evidence that it's not the iron in the bird's beaks, but another molecule that they are using to sense magnetic fields. So the evidence points to enzymes in birds' eyes called cryptochromes. Right, so what is a cryptochrome? Cryptochromes, like I said, are enzymes, and they're really ubiquitous throughout biology. Right, they're found in every branch of the tree of life. We have them. We have cryptochromes in our eyes as well. So what do cryptochromes do for us? We can't sense magnetic fields with them. But they are involved in regulating circadian rhythm, right? So you may have heard about cryptochromes in that context. So they are actually chromophores and photoreceptors, right? So they absorb light. We have a lot of light-absorbing proteins in our eyes, right? It's what allows us to sense different frequencies and different colors of light in the first place. But cryptochromes they're not actually sending signals to the brain to tell you what color things are. They are absorbing blue light, right? So cryptochromes are blue light absorbers. And the signal they send to the brain in humans is, hey, it's daytime, you need to be awake right now, or, well, it seems to be getting dark, you might want to think about going to sleep, right? So in that way, it helps regulate our circadian rhythm. I'm probably grossly oversimplifying that. But I want to talk more about birds and magnetoreception and not too much about human sleep patterns. Although I'm sure many people will be interested in that as well. It's not for today. So we have cryptochromes, but cryptochromes are a wide class of proteins. And so they have a lot of different functions. And so we think that they're also involved in magnetoreception in birds. So like I said, they're found in the eyes, and so we think that they send the signal about magnetic forces and orientation to the brain through the optic nerve. Like I said, this is going to involve a little bit of chemistry, right? So on a molecular level, what's happening is that the cryptochromes are absorbing light, or specifically they absorb blue light, and they use the energy from the photons in the light to promote electrons, to excite electrons. And so what they end up doing is they break up one of those electron pairs, right? So then you have two unpaired electrons that are no longer canceling each other's magnetic fields out, right? So now you have a molecule that can be affected, influenced by a magnetic force because of those unpaired electrons. And so this is leads to what is referred to in the scientific literature as the radical pair mechanism of magnetoreception, right? So radical there meaning basically just a chemistry term for unpaired electrons. So a radical pair, a pair of unpaired electrons, this is a radical pair mechanism. So essentially, birds have these tiny little molecular compass needles embedded in the retina of their eyes in the form of cryptochromes, and they're activated by the absorption of blue light. And so, how exactly that the enzymes generate a signal that is then sent to the brain is something that's still not fully understood. Folks working on it, trying to figure out, how exactly does the interaction of the cryptochrome with a magnetic field in a certain direction generate, some kind of neurotransmitter. We don't know exactly which neurotransmitters are involved, but we do know that the optic nerve is probably involved because scientists who are studying birds that are in cages and are trying to migrate but can't, they observe these. They observe stimulation in the area of the brain, the visual cortex of the brain, I suppose is what you would call it. Again, not a biologist, so apologies if I'm not using the correct terminology on that one. But you've got the activity in the brain, and the area of the brain that normally processes visual signals. So in a way, right, in a manner of speaking, you can say that birds can see magnetic fields, right? And how they experience that, could arguably be considered a type of sight, right? Especially since it's coming through the optic nerve. So this brings me to another topic that I wanted to talk about today, which is collisions of birds into windows, referred to as window strikes. So window strikes are often cited as the second leading cause of death among birds. I should say the anthropogenic causes of death among birds. So the first one being outdoor cats and feral cats. So usually the second cause of death in that list is window strikes. My balance here. So something that's really heartbreaking in a way about window strikes is that it's heartbreaking, but it's also concerning from a conservation standpoint. Is that window strikes affect all birds equally, regardless of whether they are healthy or not healthy, and they have a disproportionate effect on migratory birds, right? So whereas feral cats are often getting, backyard birds, resident birds that are relatively abundant and not really a conservation concern, window strikes tend to have the opposite sort of impact, right? They tend to mostly affect species which are less abundant and are more susceptible to environmental pressures, climate change, habitat destruction, etc. The birds like the bay-breasted warbler and many other members of the warbler family. In fact, the warbler family is by far and away the group of birds that is most impacted by window collisions. So why do birds crash into windows? There's a lot of reasons that they might do so. They can't see glass very well, for one thing. But most window strikes tend to happen during migration season and during the night, right? So most birds that migrate do migrate under the cover of darkness. They migrate during the night, including most warblers. And so when there are lights turned on inside a building, the birds will sometimes see that light, and presumably they might think that's a safe place to land, right? If you're looking for a place to rest, just fly right into the window, and very often don't survive that collision. So birds may also, during the daytime, crash into windows because they can either see through the window and think that there's something safe on the other side for them, or they may see a reflection, right, during certain times of the day, depending on the type of window and the angle of the sun, etc. You may see, reflections of the sky or the landscape, reflections of tree branches that they might be trying to get to. But one thing is clear from people who study window collisions and the behavior of birds around glass is that artificial light and light pollution definitely plays a role. So when it comes to nighttime collisions, right, during migration season, right, having lights turned on inside a building with large windows is sort of a recipe for large numbers of window strikes. So a lot of conservation groups, including National Audubon Society chapters, have implemented programs in cities around the country to try to reach out to the managers of skyscrapers and other buildings with large windows to ask them to turn off unnecessary lighting during the night to reduce the probability of window strikes. Many of these same groups are also doing surveys. So walking around large buildings with large glass windows to try to identify which ones are most problematic so that those windows can be treated with some kind of modification. The little stickers that you probably see, the decals that you can stick on windows, those don't actually work very well to reduce window strikes, but there are other window modifications that are more effective. And so we actually have this brings me to my last point, which is we have a group here on campus at Bowdoin, which is doing this on campus, right? We call ourselves Bird Safe Bowdoin, which is taken in part from Bird Safe Maine, which is a program of Maine Audubon. So they have a similar program down in Portland, right? So they're looking in the historic area in the downtown area in Portland. And here on the Bowdoin campus, we are going out in the early morning, right after birds have migrated through the night, and just looking for them, right? Have any of them hit the windows? Are there any injured or dead birds around our buildings on campus? So far this fall, we've been going for about 5 weeks now, and we've found a couple of dozen birds various places around campus. And so we're starting to identify which buildings are more problematic than others. Down in Portland, they found over 100, there might be over 200 now, birds that they found, if I remember correctly, just so far this season. So why are we doing this? Well, we want to identify those areas that are problematic so that we can recommend strategies to reduce window collisions, whether that involves putting the lights on timers or motion sensors so that they turn off when they're not needed, or applying something to the windows that will make the glass more visible to the birds. So these strategies are referred to as bird-friendly architecture or bird-friendly design. So we want to recommend those kinds of things in areas where they're needed. And also the modification of outdoor lighting, reduction of light pollution that can be disorienting to birds. And to tie this back into what I was saying earlier about magnetoreception, right, this could also be, although it's not really super well established, this could also be one reason that artificial lighting leads to window strikes, right, by disorienting birds, by interfering with that radical pair mechanism of cryptochromes in there, that's responsible for their ability to determine which direction to fly. And there is some evidence that might be the case based on the tendency of birds to become disoriented by spotlights, lights that are pointing directly upward towards the sky, right? So I don't know if you've ever seen for example, the 9/11 memorial they have every September during migration season, where they have huge lights where the Twin Towers once stood that point straight up, and certainly it's I don't want to say that we shouldn't be memorializing the tragedy of 9/11, but it has been observed pretty distinctively that thousands of birds become disoriented and just fly in circles over and over again, to the point where they have to turn the lights off every hour or two to let the birds disperse. Something about the artificial lighting, something about that light pollution is interfering with the bird's ability to, well, migrate, and probably something to do with their sense of direction. So, if you are interested in learning more about either getting involved with the Bird Safe Bowdoin initiative, or anything that you can do on your own, at home, for your home windows, to reduce window strikes. If you notice a problem with birds hitting your own windows, feel free to reach out to me. I'm glad to talk about options, strategies to prevent window strikes. There's also a lot of good information on the website of the American Bird Conservancy, right, sometimes known as ABC. They've done a lot of research, right? So they have scientific evidence to show which kinds of strategies work to reduce window collisions and which ones don't actually work, right? And the most common one that most people use, which is the little hawk stickers or decals that you can stick onto your windows, been shown to really not be very effective at all, maybe reducing window strikes by about 3 to 5%. But there are other methods that can reduce window strikes by over 90 to 95%. All right, that's all I got for today, and thank you so much for the invitation.
Brandon, thank you so much for bringing us the
Oh, and I get your questions too.
Yes, awesome. So if anyone has any questions, I also want to be mindful of time. So if we need to scoot out, please do that. But do not forget your bird of the month pin. So we actually have last month's as well as this month's out on the counter here. But yes, Brandon's here for any questions.
What buildings on campus have you encountered towards more?
That was my question.
Yeah, so far, this building has been among the top 3. Even though it doesn't have an awful lot of windows, I think it may have something to do with the lighting, the interior lighting. Then there's also the roof center for the environment, ironically.
Wow.
Which is maybe not unexpected because it is probably it has the largest glass facades of any buildings on campus. And then the Visual Arts Center is also another one that I've seen a lot.
A fantastic talk, not the least because I'm going to go away with 10 times more questions on the system. I was just, is blue light actually required to kind of prime these cryptochromes? And if so, what are they doing there?
Right. So again, this is not entirely understood, but the hypothesis is, as I understand it, the ideal cryptochrome functioning is with low levels of light. Right. So cryptochromes work best when, well, at nighttime, right? When you have light from the moon and stars, but not direct sunlight. Right. So. Like I was saying, artificial light pollution increases the level of light in the sky dramatically, which could be kind of overwhelming the magnetoreception signals that the birds are getting. Yeah. So it's sort of like, you wouldn't be able to necessarily see which direction you're going if if the sun's right in your eyes, right? You say you're driving at, in the late afternoon or early morning when the sun's on the horizon, you're driving towards the sun, you can't see where you're going because there's too much. So something similar may be going on.
I just wanted to make a comment that I was introduced to Smith College's new library yesterday, and they did a beautiful $125 million renovation, and it's a lot of glass. And as part of the design budget, they built in bird-safe windows. And I'm just wondering if Bowdoin is pursuing a similar. I'm just thinking of the two new projects that are going up.
Right.
In an area where we might see quite a bit of birds because we have pines right there.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know if Bowdoin's making a commitment to build
To my
bird-safe
knowledge-
buildings?
To my knowledge, that is not something that they've actively sought to do at this point,
Yeah.
but that is part of our initiative, right? Is to start initiating those kinds of conversations with the people who are making decisions about building design. And it's something that that many Audubon chapters and other conservation groups are trying to work with architectural schools and try to implement this awareness of this issue into the basic curriculum for people who are studying architecture, engineering, people who are going to be designing buildings.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like the LEED certification process is the point in which you could get a lot of either mid-career professionals.
Yeah,
to
so
understand
there
that.
is a little bit in the so I think you can earn points,
Yep.
right, for bird safe design, right, in LEED. I think it's a relatively recent development. It wasn't in there for a while, but it's been added. Yeah.
Thank you, Brandon, this was super informative. We go back and look up the structure of curriculum, okay? So, my question is there any one bird, species, or type that's predominated in the corpses that you found around campus? There seem to be any sort of trend there?
Yeah, so not a specific species per se, but over half of the birds that we found have been warblers. And so the second most prominent, most abundant family of birds that we found are sparrows. Right, so warblers and sparrows are, and not house sparrows like the ones that you may have in your backyard all the time. We're talking about migratory sparrows, really white-throated sparrows are a major one. So warblers and sparrows mainly, but we also get a little bit of everything.
And I wonder if those are, so you said warblers are incredibly migratory, they travel distances, so are sparrows to follow that same.
Some sparrows do, yes, white-throated sparrows
Yeah.
have pretty long distance migrants, yeah.
Great, well, thank you all so much for being here. We look forward to seeing you in November. And Brandon, thank you again so much.